Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Hager number BB1199. This is an ETW 4 5x5 hinge in an oil-rubbed bronze finish. This is a pretty special hinge. In the sense that it is it's a few things. First of all, and I'm studying it, I don't recall the last time I've seen a heavyweight solid bronze hinge. Okay. Wanted to be sure of what it said on the logo. So this is an energy transfer hinge. This is an electric through wire hinge. I'm going to take a moment and just clean up the wires hanging on the back of this and just tie them together in the sense of making them more neat so that they don't get hung up on anything. Okay. So this is, and the way to understand what the hinge here is to understand the part number, to dissect the part number. So we're dealing with a BB1199, and that tells us a number of things. Okay, a little more neatly put together there. So this is an oil rub bronze from Hager. And if you know anything about hinges, you might, immediately be able to detect that this is a heavyweight hinge. This hinge is made in the United States. That is something that's not common, unfortunately. For a lot of things that we sell. But nonetheless, moving forward, this is a heavyweight ball bearing solid bronze hinge, 5x5. It is a 4-wire hinge, ETW, electric through wire. There are 4 wires on this hinge, meaning there are 2 pair. It would be more appropriate to say 2 pair. Well, it would be appropriate to call it 2 pair. You have wire colors, which we will dissect in a moment. Violet, yellow, red, and I think gray is what that other color is going to be called. You have a rubber sleeve over the important part of the wires, meaning where it's going to come out of the door and the frame. Okay, you've got a dab of silicone here, or whatever this material is. It's not silicone. It's definitely some sort of an epoxy or adhesive. Keeps that sealed. And where would you use a 4-wire hinge? Well, you're always going to, whenever you do electric transfer hinge work, you're always going to have more wires than the project is outlined to require, because you need to have backup. If you crimp a wire, if you damage a wire, there's no way to salvage the hinge if you need that wire, and it's beyond, it cannot be used because it's been sheared, cut, crimped, compromised. So a 4-wire hinge tells me that there's not a lot happening on the door in the sense of, connecting an automatic operator to a rec switch, to an electric strike, you see my point, or an electromagnetic door holder. In a 4-wire hinge, you may have just a rec switch, a request to exit switch, and an exit device that will signal back to a access control that says, push pad has been pushed, or, electric latch retraction where the latch pulls back. Something just relatively straightforward. One action is actually happening, which would require 2 wires. You won't get a 2-wire electric hinge. There'll always be at least 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 generally. 4-wire or 8-wire or 12-wire would be common. A 6-wire sometimes, but you'll generally find 4 or 8 or 12, I suppose, only because what you're going to be using it for, you'll want to have at least a pair left over. That's just always going to be the way that they'll be made up. This is a 5x5 hinge and an oil-rubbed bronze finish. Let's talk at length about that size of this hinge. So now the discussion on the size. So this is a 5x5 hinge. That sounds pretty garden variety. Although it tells us a lot about the hinge, just knowing the size and the width. But first, what is a 5x5? Well, a 5x5 is 5-inch tall and 5-inch wide. It's really important to understand that, unlike doors, the height is the first dimension on a hinge. And why is that so? Well, I don't know, but my guess, what I believe, is that whether it be a kick plate, or a door, or a hinge, or an access panel, or a roof hatch, the first dimension is, in my mind, if I had to say one dimension was more important than the other, I would say the first dimension is important on a door. What would you rather know first? That it was 7 foot tall? Okay, it's 7 foot tall. So is almost every other door in the commercial world. Or would you rather know it's 3 foot? So the width being the first dimension is kind of the more important of the two, because it tells you so many other things immediately that you have to know about the door. On a hinge, the same is true. The height is actually, in my opinion, more important than the width, even though the width is incredibly important. You can't screw around with the height. The way the door and frame are prepped, the height has to be correct. That width, you can kind of hang a door if your width isn't the perfect width, or the correct width, or the best practice width, but that height's got to be accurate. It also tells us the sort of capacity of the door, or the capacity of what the hinge is expected to handle. Is it if you're talking a 5-inch tall hinge, okay, why is it 5-inch tall? Is it a heavy or a wide 3-foot door that's 1 3/4 inches? Or is it possibly a 2 1/4 inch thick door that's just average and run-of-the-mill? Who knows? It could be anything. At that point, we're not really sure, but we can be told a lot of things about the hinge automatically. If you know that you're dealing with a steel door and a steel frame that's 1 3/4 inch thick door, and it's a 5-inch hinge, yeah, it's probably a wide door, because best practice would say certainly 3'6" and wider should have a 5-inch tall hinge. That would be considered best practice, because a 5-inch hinge versus a 4.5-inch hinge has about a 20% greater capacity to handle the work that it's being asked to do. So that's why you're going to upgrade that hinge. Well, this is a heavyweight versus the standard weight. A 5-inch standard weight hinge would be 140 thousandths. This is 190 thousandths. Let's get the truth machine here and see how accurate that is. I do tip my hand to Hager on this hinge, and I'll tell you, my hat. I'll tell you why in a second. Not bad, Hager. Not bad at all. On the nose, 0.19. 19. Perfect. I'm going to tip my hat to them on this hinge, because they've not done it as well in the past. In the crotch of the hinge, here, down here, on the other side, their finishing is good. I've seen hinges from Hager in the past where we had multiple problems. We had finish not being done very well inside of this area. They've corrected that. I've had milling run out. Not milling run out, but sanding run out on the leaf, where they must have been dressing the leaf, and that machine came down and just ran heavy, and there was run out here where it was sanded down, abrasively sanded down, so the leaf was no longer exactly 190 thousandths all the way across. This is a good quality of the hinge. I don't know if those other ones that I referred to were not domestically manufactured. I don't really know. But I don't necessarily believe the country of origin really has that much to do about it. I mean, our iPhones are made, in Asia, in China, and they're exceptional works of industrial manufacturing. I'm merely saying that I have seen less than ideal oil rubbed from Hager in the past. This would be an example of a good piece of oil rubbed hinge. What I'm blowing off here is the styrofoam that they use. It's not going to really so much matter if it's a satin chrome, but on oil rub, you really don't want to touch it, because there's a hand process that's been done to this. There's been, I'm not an expert on the process, but an acid wash and then a hand process where oil is literally rubbed into the material. So you don't want to touch it because you'll not only get oil on your hands, but you will, over time, if you were to continually touch it, wear that finish off. So a really good looking example of what a hinge looks like from them. So back to the size, the fact that it's 5-inch wide tells me it's probably not an 1 3/4 thick door, because it's really too wide of a hinge to fit on an 1 3/4 door with a typical 1/4-inch back set. So I'm pretty much thinking this is 2 1/4 inch or 2-inch thick door. While you could force a 5-inch wide hinge onto an 1 3/4 door, that would be incorrect, completely incorrect. Now, why would you use a 5-inch wide on an 1 3/4 thick door? In the sense of, if your frame is prepped for a 5-inch, you may be able to make that work with the logic that you literally needed to have your vertical axis of pivoting moved out. So a 5-inch tall by 4.5-inch wide, this is going to have a vertical axis of pivoting a 1/4 inch further this way. That might be what you want because of a clearance requirement. The determination of the width of the hinge, and they're always measured laid flat in front of you, is door thickness minus back set times 2 plus your clearance plus your inset. So your door thickness, that's easy. Subtract your back set from that. And on an 1 3/4 thick door, your back set, the amount of the door thickness that the hinge does not encroach into, is generally a 1/4 inch on an 1 3/4 thick door. Let's say that it is. 1 3/4 minus 1/4 is 1.5 inches, times 2 is 3 inch, plus your clearance. The clearance is the face of the frame to the face of the door when the door is open to 180 degrees. Now, if you have a frame that wraps your wall, you have zero clearance, zero requirement, because there's nothing sticking off the face of the frame that when the door opens, it has to get out and around. So that would be 0, and your inset would be less than 1/8 of an inch. So in this scenario, you need, and then you go to the next largest size. So in our scenario, 4-inch would be the size. But what if you had a 1-inch clearance requirement, meaning on this opening, your frame was either inset into the wall, or you had applied casing that when you open the door to 180 degrees, you had to get around that outside corner of the wall. Well, let's say that that's 1 inch. 1 3/4 minus 1/4 times 2 is 3, plus a 1-inch clearance, plus your inset, which is the distance from the face of the frame to the face of the door. If your door is scooched in a little bit, which it will be if it's a hollow metal door and frame, but maybe not if it's aluminum. Let's just say it's 1/8 of an inch, but it's really about 3/32. Now you're looking at a dimension that's just over 4-inch. So you go to the next available size. Well, that would be 4.5 inch in this scenario. 5 by 4.5. Well, what if that clearance was 1 3/4? You get the point. And that's how you go about doing it. Door thickness minus your back set times 2 plus your clearance plus your inset. That's what will be determined. Now, I don't know if that math was applied to a 5-inch wide hinge in this scenario, but if someone comes in and says, I've got a 2 1/4 inch thick door, 5 by 5 is what you're looking at. Or something else, but 5 by 5 is where we would start, and then we would nitpick that to get to the best size, and it might automatically be a 5 by 5. Okay, so the finish. This is a Hager BB1199. That means a number of things. That means that this is a ball bearing hinge. Because it's heavyweight, which is inferred in the part number as well, there will be 4 bearing packets. There are 4 bearing packets because it's a heavyweight hinge. Okay, BB 1199 means a number of things. It means it's heavyweight, means it's non-ferrous, means it's 5 knuckle, means it's full mortise. Let's dissect that 1199 part of the part number by actually looking at the hinge that we have here. Okay, now going on about the BB, you can see why we call it ball bearing. 4 bearing packets, $11.99. That means that it is a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves right at the tip of my finger here and here that that's a full mortise hinge. They're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame when the leaves are brought parallel. That's a full mortise hinge. We demonstrated earlier that this was a non-ferrous hinge. Now from Hager, now the reason that magnets stick in there is because those ball bearings inside of there are certainly made of steel, but the hinge leaf itself is non-ferrous. In terms of Hager, $11.99 can mean, it means non-ferrous. However, it can mean 3 things. It can mean brass, it can mean bronze, and it can mean stainless steel. The finish that you apply to the part number that you're building then defines the actual base material. So full mortise, BB, non-ferrous, and then finally, again, heavy weight. The $11.99, that 9 at the end, tells us whatever the hinge size, it's the heavyweight version of it. If this was an $11.91, it would be a standard weight, which again is 140 thousandths. So that is what all of that means in that part number. We talked about the size, we talked about the through wire. Let's switch to the screen view where we can take a look at the extended description and the supporting documents. So this is the item that we're looking at here, and we're dealing with 5x5 heavyweight. We've talked about most of the information here. Let's cover what we've not already covered. 4-wire 28 gauge. These are very thin wires. It's standard for a lot of electric transfer hinges that 28 gauge is there. Some other manufacturers, and Hager certainly included, they can provide you with a pair of much thicker wires, with the balance being the thinner gauge. But this hinge is going to handle 50 up to 48 volts DC current, 3.5 amp continuous, and it will handle a 16 amp pulse, or a pulse would be what a piece of hardware requires that has a high inrush. Von Duprin manufactures exit devices with solenoids that require that high inrush for whatever the milliseconds are, 300 milliseconds, whatever it might be. This hinge is rated to handle that. With the evolution of the industry that we're in, solenoids are going away and they're going to become motors, and motors to drive retraction or whatever it might be will take a lot less power, but it eliminates the inrush requirement as well. But this hinge will handle it if you're dealing with something that requires an inrush. Everything here we've talked about, the particulars, 8 hole count. This hinge, the hinge that I have here, is AMS half WS. That means it came with all metal screws, AMS, all metal screws, or actually all template machine screws is what it came with. These are template machine screws, meaning they're meant to be going into a templated preparation in a door and a frame, steel door, steel frame. But it only came with half wood screws, and these screws are 1224 threaded to the head Phillips drive screws, and actually that screw is mandatory for use on a fire-rated door. However, this hinge is not permissible for use on a fire-rated door, not because it's electrified or electric transfer, but because it's of a non-ferrous base material other than stainless. You can do this hinge in a stainless or in a steel base and have it on a fire-rated door, but not a 613 or an oil-rubbed hinge. Now, if you have need for a particular arrangement of screws, do not hesitate to let us know in the comment field. You might be putting this on a wood door and a wood frame. You'll want to specify all wood screws. It would be considered proper and best practice to define what screws you want. If you leave it up to the factory, they're probably going to send you all machine screws and half wood screws. Not that you won't get all wood and all machine screws, but in the absence of definition, the factory will ship what they define their standard as, which may not be what you need. Hinges are cross-pinned and are not field removable. You cannot take the pins out of these hinges at all because they are riveted, not riveted, they have a roll pin inserted in this process because they're running wires through that barrel. There's a chase inside of there. For use on heavy doors or doors requiring high frequency of use, be mindful that this hinge is not load bearing. While it's a heavyweight ball bearing hinge, it's not intended to carry load, so you're going to install it never at the top position, always in the middle. At the bottom, if that suited your requirements, and I suppose that it certainly could, you might be doing something where having power come through the bottom hinge location may be advantageous to you. And what I'm thinking of is a door with full glass. So having that hinge at the bottom will save you, whatever, 3 foot or less in travel distance of the wire. But generally in the middle location. Supporting documents, there's a template. Before we get to that, let's talk about the product catalog. This product catalog is right out of the Hager full line catalog. This is going to be what you would see in terms of all of their hinges of this nature. If I search for BB1199, well, I can't, but let's just scroll through. We will find it. BB1191, BB1199, right there. So again, going over what we've already talked about, heavyweight ball bearing, non-ferrous base material. Here are the sizes that you can count on getting a BB1199 in, and lots of good sizes, that's to be sure. 4.5 by 4 and 4-inch wide. And then we talked about our clearance. What's really nice is they're giving you these sizes, okay, in a 5-inch tall hinge. These 3 different widths, 6 by 4.5. If you have an exceptionally high frequency, heavy door, yeah, you're going to want 6 by 4.5. 1 3/4 inch thick door, yep. You got a 4.0 14 gauge door that's getting used 1,000 times a day, yeah, you better believe it. Then they get into really large hinges, 6 by 5, 6.6, 8.6, and then 8 by 8. I've done 8 by 8 hinges in the past, heavyweight, bronze, oil rubbed. They're just epically huge pieces of equipment, and they are used on epically thick doors as well. Okay, now let's get to that template that I clicked on first. What's important about this is that it shows you where to drill the hole in your door leaf and your frame leaf to pass those wires through. C note A and C note B. What are these notes? Note A, drill and deburr a 1-inch hole through the door leaf. And then note B, oh, I'm doing it backwards. Note B is the 3/4 inch hole. Note A is the 1-inch hole. They give you all of the locations of where to locate or of where to place that hole. Okay, center line, 13/16 from the outside of the leaf. The 3/4 hole is at 7/16, centered on the hinge leaf over here and centered on this hinge leaf as well. So you'll need to prep the frame for that. If this is, and this isn't, but if this were to be a fire rated frame, be mindful drilling those holes in the field would be expressly prohibited. That needs to be done under label service or at the factory when they're making the frames, because that'll be under label service. Deburring the holes is important. You don't want to short your circuit by having a frayed sleeve over the conductor. Talk about, oh, there it is, 300 milliseconds is what that inrush is good for. So I was in the ballpark with that, 300 milliseconds. 1/3 of a second, well, almost, 3/10. This template is good for 5-inch tall hinges that are either standard weight steel based, heavyweight steel based, standard weight non-ferrous, and heavyweight non-ferrous. The 2 different gauges. I said earlier that it was 140 thousandths. It is 145 thousandths. I misspoke. And is good for these 3 widths of hinges. This hinge is intended to be used in the center position. Okay, and apparently you can do hospital type and round corner on these hinges from Hager. If you needed, it'd be very typical to have a hospital tip where they grind the tip of the hinge down, but that has to be ordered that way so as to not compromise exactly what's happening with those wires transferring through there. Okay, so a very handy document. It is There's some paperwork in the box. And these are instructions is what they are. And these are not currently linked to down below here, so let's take a closer look at the instructions. Okay, so those installation instructions I did have to scan, and they'll be added to the item that you're looking at before you see this video. All EMN, ETM hinge monitoring circuits, okay, not appropriate to us. We're not doing a monitor hinge. ETW, current voltage characteristics. Okay, open door remove. Okay. So if you needed to test the hinge, they're showing how you can pass very low current through your hinges here to do so. Yeah, okay, so this is under removal and adjustment. Should you need to check the integrity of the circuit, whether it's open or closed, you will use your multimeter, set it to so that you want to measure ohms or resistance, and you'll certainly be able to do that. You know, yeah, you'll get a reading if the circuit is intact. The ohm meter will indicate whether the circuit is open, meaning the current will not flow, or closed, meaning it will flow. When the hinge leaves are closed, yeah, so you're obviously going to have that wired to something. You'll be able to determine the integrity of the circuit there. Okay, not much to talk about when it comes to the ETW hinge. All right, so let's just close that up. Okay, we have gone through all of the supporting documentation of the item. Now, there is a link here to the manufacturer's page. When you click on that, it's going to open up our manufacturer's page within the site. That will allow you to review not only all of the Hager products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. Other encyclopedic documents are kept here, such as the keying service manual. That's handy. I made a video on their keying system. They have their, we have uploaded the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. That applies to Hager products. They supply thresholds that would certainly apply there. They do supply, and I don't know how much this document talks about low energy operators, or it would certainly also comply with the height at which material is installed that Hager manufactures, 4 to 48 inch for many things. Okay, let's finish up this video on camera. Okay, so in conclusion, this is a good example of a quality hinge from Hager. I have no trouble with the fit and finish. Hager loves to do what they call a US 10R. This oil rubbed gives me a little bit of that 10R finish, but then at times you also see the oil rubbed feel from it, like when I hold it here. But when I get over and hold it where the light reflects on it differently, like up in here, I get more of a US 10R. The bottom line with oil rubbed, it's what's termed as a living finish. It's a fancy way of saying it's unstable, it's different not only from manufacturer to manufacturer, it's different from hinge to hinge. Oil rub that you'll get is based on it's based on a formula. Not everyone's following the identical formula because other things come into play, such as believe it or not, the altitude at which the factory occurs affects the ultimate finish. So there's natural variation that comes with oil rub. So if you're ordering US 10B, specifically 613 finish, which means bronze base material with an oil rubbed, and you have Hager hinges, and you have Yale exit devices, and you have, LCN door closers that are all oil rubbed, that's all going to be different. It will be complementary, but the very definition of oil rubbed, the true definition of oil rubbed, is living finish. It changes. And if you touch the hardware, like I said earlier, you'll wear the finish off. Now, no one's going to touch a hinge, but the handles on that door that are oil rubbed, they will be oil rubbed at the top and bottom, and that center area will reveal the bronze base material. To some, that's a beautiful finish, that wear that occurs over time. To other people, they say this finish is defective. The finish wore off. No, it's not defective. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do. But maybe what we need to do is understand better, what finish do you want? Do you want a living finish, or do you want a stable finish? And in that case, you go with something else, or you can do a powder coat or a oil rubbed equivalent, which would be a powder coat finish, which would be that dark brown, even a little warm, but it'll be a stable finish. It won't change with time. Hager did a good job on this hinge. Their logo right there, it's a bit hard to see, but it says USA right below it. This hinge does say on the back, made in USA. That does not mean that because Hager's logo says Hager USA means that their products are made in the United States, because much of it is not, which is not unusual for Hager or anyone else who does door hardware. But in fairness to the folks who are exclusively domestically manufacturing hinges, exclusively, in fairness, Hager USA does not necessarily mean made in USA. This hinge apparently is. They put a label on there that says it is. So in fairness to everyone involved, I'm happy to have reviewed this hinge. I'm very happy to see a nice quality hinge from Hager as well. And they generally are, but there have been some misses, but this is a complete hit. Any questions on the Hager BB1199 ETW? And a 4-wire in an oil rub bronze finish or any other Hager product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.